Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome an expert in public relations and author from Montreal, Canada, Jackson Wightman. Jackson, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Jackson is the founder of Proper Propaganda PR, and he's an author. And all of you know I'm very partial to authors. He's an author of a book titled The Tech PR Playbook. So, Jackson, before we start talking public relations, tell me about your journey and what was the inspiration for you to start your career in PR, particularly in the tech space?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So I started out in politics. I was a graduate student in Ottawa, Canada, and I got an opportunity to work on Parliament Hill, which was really interesting as a student of political science. Was working for a political party, was working for a future Prime Minister of Canada at the
Mhm.
time on his issue management team. And it was a really fascinating way to learn about media and how media works. Obviously, the
Mm.
political realm is far from tech, which I do now, but it was a pressure cooker and it was a
Yeah.
really cool way to kind of learn about media. From there, went into the corporate world, got some good experience there for about for 4 years, and then started the agency in 2012. We
Mm.
totally happened into tech. It wasn't a decision. It was basically just dumb luck.
Mm.
And it's a space I've enjoyed, and I've enjoyed it primarily because it is very dynamic. I like the energy, and it's given me the opportunity to
That's
work around the world and travel around the world.
fascinating. And you've told me why you started Proper Propaganda, but what was the gap you were aiming to fill?
So, one of the things that you hear a lot about PR, you've heard this, I'm sure, you probably experienced it in your illustrious career. A lot of PR agencies are prone to talking in ways that are maybe a little less than frank. The
Mm.
PR billing model is a little outdated. It's basically most of the time just a time for money model. So we saw some gaps in terms of being able to have maybe more frank conversations with clients, and also to bring in a billing model that was a little bit more performance based to an industry that where this was sort of sorely lacking. And
Mm.
that billing model allows you, when you have a performance based model, I mean, our model does contain some guaranteed fees, but a performance based billing model allows you to have more frank conversations. And it also allows you to price a service that's often very variable and uncertain in terms of outcomes in a way that shares risk.
Mm. Wow. Let's now move to Proper Propaganda. How do you define a compelling brand narrative, especially when it comes to tech companies?
Sure. There's a few traits of good brand narrative.
Mhm.
One is that good brand narrative is sticky, so people can remember it.
Mhm.
I think for an idea to be sticky, an idea needs to be dead simple.
Hmm.
So that's something that sometimes when you get in with engineering heavy
Yeah.
companies, which a lot of tech companies are, becomes a more difficult thing.
Hmm.
But a sticky, simple brand narrative is good. And I think the other thing about a good brand narrative, or all good brand narratives, is that they put the customer into the kind of role of hero of the story. So it's not just about the company, it's framed in the context of the customer and how the
Hmm.
customer is really on this journey, and the company is sort of a helping hand, a guide, if you will, to help the customer achieve what
Hmm.
they want.
Hmm. Hmm. And what, in your view, are some common mistakes tech companies make when they're handling PR in-house?
There's a few that come up. One is that, and it's not necessarily a mistake, but I think the value of external counsel versus in-house work
Hmm.
is that external counsel has third-party perspective. An agency has many things it's probably touching within a day versus an in-house team who's thinking about the company they work at.
Hmm.
So sometimes over reliance on in-house can lead to kind of blinkers, and sometimes outside counsel can help with those blinkers. The
Hmm.
other thing that sometimes can happen in-house is that you end up with this sort of groupthink that can occur. And again, agencies, good ones at least, can bring outside perspective that
Mm,
mitigates that.
Well said. You know, I remember, I'm not talking of 4 decades ago, we used to be always told by the PR agencies that uh, good news release on a Monday, bad news release on a Friday, because in those days there used to be newspapers. But today, I guess in
Yes,
the age of technology, uh, it doesn't really matter. So my question is, what does successful tech PR look like in today's media landscape?
it is a great question. And I appreciate it. I mean, at the beginning of my career, that was the axiom as well, particularly in
Mm,
politics. It's
mm,
bad news on a Friday. And I think it still is a common enough
mm,
nugget of wisdom that I still hear deployed. So
mm.
newspapers are not, that has not necessarily gone away, that
Okay.
axiom.
Okay.
But to your question, to where you were really going, what does success look like for tech PR? It looks it looks a few ways, I think, and that success obviously is defined by individual goals and individual
Mm,
contexts. But if I was thinking about it in terms of common pictures of success, common successful outcomes, they tend to have a few things in PR.
mm,
Number one, there is more awareness and more brand equity built for a company. How do
mm,
you measure brand equity? One way to measure it is share of voice. Another way to measure it is sentiment analysis about the brand. So after a good PR campaign, you want to own more of the conversation in your
mm,
category. You
mm,
also want to make sure that the conversation you own does not frame you as Darth Vader, that it frames you in a way that, you're a positive,
mm,
there's good sentiment about you. So that's one version of success. I think
mm.
another version of success that's perhaps less talked about is the good PR and more brand equity should lower overall marketing
Yeah.
costs. Companies with more brand equity tend to have higher return on ad spend. Companies with more brand equity tend to have lower marketing costs across the board. So that's another thing that good PR should do, whether it's tech or whether it's not. And then these days, and we're in a really interesting moment in PR
Mm,
because of AI, because of things like
yeah.
ChatGPT. ChatGPT search, Perplexity search, Claude search, all of these things are in great ascendance. I'm sure you've heard that, your
Yeah.
listeners have too. Google still has a great business with its blue links, but one of the successful outcomes these days, and one of the things that our clients are talking to us a lot about, is how am I showing up in generative engines? How
Mm,
am I showing up when somebody says, what is the best set of earbuds or the best keyboard or the
yeah.
best whatever it is?
Mm,
And that today for a lot of tech companies, particularly consumer tech companies, but
mm,
B2B as well, matters a lot. So another pillar of success these days, and I think this will increase in the future, is how are you showing up in those AI
yeah.
engines and where are you showing up, where you're not showing up. So three
Mm,
three pillars really.
mm. That's a very powerful comment about how you're showing up on these generative AI platforms. Thank you. That was a great share for my viewers and listeners.
Good.
And Jackson, I also wanted to get your perspective on influencers. And again,
Mm,
I'm from the boomers generation, so when I was young and there used to be no concept of influencers. The only influencers we had were either sportsmen or cinema stars.
right.
But I wanted to
Right.
ask you, what makes influencer collaborations truly impactful rather than make them just superficial?
So influencers are an interesting part of PR.
Hmm.
And I would argue that we've had influencers since time immemorial.
Yeah,
I mean, you could say that Cleopatra was an influencer, perhaps.
absolutely.
We could have that conversation
Yeah,
some other day, or
yeah,
Mark
yeah, yeah.
Antony, whoever. But, and certainly characters like Cicero or Plato, they were influencers for sure.
Mm, mm,
Jokes aside, and my facetiousness aside, influencer campaigns that work
mm,
tend to be based on a couple of factors. One, the brand and the brand's particular goals line up well with the influencers that they
mm,
select to
mm.
work with.
Yeah.
So if I've got um, a dog product that is aimed at houses with big dogs. I
Mm.
want to make sure that that lines up in the influencer choice. And I'm being a bit facile with
Yeah,
the
yeah,
example,
I'm
but
with
I'm
you.
being facile to make a point.
Sure.
The second thing that tends to matter a lot in influencer relations is the brief that the company or agency gives to the influencer. So if we're going to go after a bunch of YouTubers for particular content,
Right.
clearly we're going to want them to do things in the way that they know their audience likes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we're going to want to make sure that perhaps message X or message Y
Mm.
makes it into those videos.
Mm.
So very, very clear briefs and very, very clear targeting. And
Mm.
again, not to pepper this in everywhere, but you'll be able to tell this is on my brain after this
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
More and more, what we are seeing is that there's great overlap between certain types of influencer campaigns
Mm-hmm.
and how a brand shows up in generative search.
Mm.
So if you're working with a group of YouTubers, YouTube is very, very heavily scraped by
Mm.
Google AI overviews. Of course, Google owns
Yeah.
YouTube
Yeah.
and by Perplexity. So you want to make sure in those influencer campaigns that you're thinking about how is what the influencer producing
Mm.
going to influence how we show up in generative engines
Mm.
and key prompts for our category again. And in the case of YouTube, a lot of that has to do with transcriptions, descriptions, meta tags, things that
Mm.
are not necessarily just the video.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. How do you keep a brand story consistent while allowing it to evolve over time?
So there's a few ways this is done. And I think traditionally we've had there are guardians in many companies
Right.
who sometimes border on sort of Gestapo-like behavior about this,
Mm.
and those guardians play a role. And I think any company of any size needs to have
Mm.
somebody who says, "Hey, I am the guardian of this brand, or we are the guardians of this brand in this department, and we want to make sure that people are singing from the same hymn book. We want to make sure that imagery reflects things." One of the first ways to do this is to have a very consistent, very widely read brand guidelines guide. A lot of companies don't have this. I'm always surprised even bigger companies don't. It's
Mm.
an important thing. And that brand, that is a sort of, uh, a book through which everything is filtered and everything is
Mm.
done. And it is the guidebook for the brand. The second way you do it is just careful systems of checks and balances
Mm.
upon any public facing content that goes out. So whether that's your social team, your Amazon team, your website team, whatever it is, there just needs to be a process for checking that down. And
Mm.
then I think it comes down to training spokespeople who are going to be dealing with the media to, again, say the right things and say them in the right tone of voice and all of that. How do
Mm.
you evolve a brand? I think a brand naturally evolves over time.
Yeah.
Some brands, we think about legacy brands like Coca-Cola or perhaps British Airways or something, where
Mm.
these are brands that I've
Yeah.
always been impressed with, or
Mm.
or even certain fashion houses like Versace is one I've always been impressed with. I would never wear a Versace, but the brand impresses me and the way
Yeah.
they framed it impresses me. Um, when we think about those brands, they've just they've evolved slowly, but I think in ways that reflect the zeitgeist. There's
Mm.
not been Brands get into trouble when they try to go from black to white or when they try and do a 180, and we've seen instances of that
Mm.
throughout history.
Mm. Mm.
Uh, the way to evolve is slowly, and I think with an eye towards the zeitgeist, if that makes sense.
Mm. Well said. An important aspect of PR is always journalists, in addition, of course, to your influence.
Yeah.
What, in your view, are some of the best practices to build a long-term relationship with journalists?
It's a great question, and it's a question that we mess up in my business,
Yeah.
not necessarily in my business, but in the industry all the time.
Mm.
So journalists are responsible to editors and editors to the audience.
Mm.
So you don't want to be overly transactional. You don't want to be the person who shows up at the 11th hour saying, "Hey, I'm pitching you this. Let's go, write about this."
Mm.
You want to have a longer term relationship that is not just about you. You want to become a trusted source of information about a category. And there's
Mm.
a range of unobtrusive ways to do that. So it could be that, you have an early access to a report on trends in the
Mm,
industry, and you
mm,
send that to the journalist, and
mm.
it's just, hey, John, here's the report on automotive trends for this quarter.
Yeah.
You may have seen it, you may not, but I'm sending it to you.
Mm,
That's not pitching your latest automotive product. That's
mm.
being a helpful resource.
Yeah.
And so if there's anything people need to remember about journalists in particular is these days they are very, very busy. We hear over and over again about newsrooms being culled.
Mm,
That makes the value of reliable sources more and more valuable to them.
mm,
Being a reliable source means talking about things that are not just you, that
mm,
are helpful to them. So that's the main piece of advice, and it's a pretty simple one. Be
mm.
a resource, don't just be a pitchman.
Correct. Correct. Great response. Let's now talk a little bit about the US market, and I know you do work there also. What do international tech firms often misunderstand about breaking into the US market, which is probably the world's biggest market?
There's a few things, and I appreciate the question very much because it shows up in my day-to-day work all the time.
Mm,
The first thing about the US market is that the US consumer,
mm,
more certainly than the European consumer and
mm,
other consumers around the world,
mm,
puts a lot of faith in brand.
mm,
So going into the US and saying, we're going to do it all on the backs of performance marketing because that's what's worked over here,
mm,
you need to build brand in the US.
mm,
That takes time. The other thing about the US,
mm.
especially as distinct certainly from, India, and it's certainly as distinct from Europe, distribution is very different.
Right.
So US consumer, and we did a survey on this at my firm in the early part of this year.
Mm,
US consumers overwhelmingly like to buy tech on Amazon. They
mm,
are overwhelmingly reticent about buying DTC.
mm.
So a lot of companies, and this is a strategy, DTC works as a great strategy
Yeah.
in the European market in particular.
Mm,
US consumers are very reluctant about that versus Amazon. They're also very reluctant about it versus brick and mortar. So
mm,
often what we see is companies come in, they're very impatient about brand building, and their distribution is focused on DTC, and the point of
mm,
sales is focused on DTC
mm,
versus Amazon and brick and mortar, which are, to the US tech buyer at least, much more important channels for a range of reasons that I think are very
mm.
American, if I can
Yeah.
say that.
Yeah.
Everybody likes Amazon because the return policy is easy.
Mm,
Everybody likes Amazon because Jeff Bezos is going to bring it to you in a day, maybe that
mm,
day.
mm,
So there are some particularities to the US market. Those are the two biggest reasons for failure. The
mm,
other is US buyers of tech, at least, they're price sensitive, but they're not as price sensitive, and there is lower price elasticity of demand for
mm.
tech than other countries, particularly if I think of certain Asian countries like China or Middle Eastern companies like
Mm,
Israel, where there's
mm.
higher price elasticity of
Yeah.
demand. So
Yeah.
those are three big areas.
Very interesting. And what kind of tech products and services resonate the most with American consumers today?
So, and I don't have stats here, so I want to be careful on this, but
Hmm.
I, I know we know about consumer tech, and the things that seem to work
Mm,
are those that you would expect, which are phones, computing, peripherals, wearables is an increasingly
mm,
as a segment that remains massive. There's a lot more wellness and fitness
mm.
stuff than there was 10 years ago. Those
Yeah.
are a couple of the main groups that we have seen matter a lot.
Mm,
And they all have their own little particularities. I would say if there's any general thing, it's
mm,
that Americans like to shop for those things on Amazon when and if they can.
Interesting. Jackson, I have time for two more questions for you.
Sure.
Your output-based billing model is a departure from traditional PR. How does it work, and what advantages does this model offer to clients compared to an hourly or a retainer-based billing?
Certainly. So the model is as follows. There's three numbers in our lexicon. There's guaranteed money,
Hmm.
which is you're going to pay this every month, no matter what. There's a certain portion guaranteed. There's variable fees, and then the third sort of thing in our nomenclature
Yeah.
is total
Hmm.
potential compensation. That's a cap figure.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what we might do is we might say, here's a 40-hour a month mandate. You will pay $5,000 in guaranteed fees. There's 3,000 up for grabs in variable fees with a total potential compensation of say 8K per month. I'm just using an example here.
Hmm.
To get from 5,000 to 8,000, we have to say deliver on something. And I'm just going to
Hmm.
use the example of media coverage.
Yeah.
A client might say, okay, we want to hire you for media relations. We want to be covered in places X, Y, and Z. If we get them into places X, Y, and Z, there's a per article billing. We're not buying that media. It is genuine earned media, but we have a way to quantify output
Hmm.
with that.
Hmm.
So typically we tie fees to media relations outcomes. We might tie these days to generative engine outcomes. We might tie to clicks or sales, or there's a
Hmm.
range of sort of
Hmm.
things we
Hmm.
can use, but that's usually how it works. There are three numbers: guaranteed money, variable money, total potential compensation. And
Hmm.
as I said, what this does, it does two things. One, it assuages fears that the client may have because they
Hmm.
know we're an interested party. And two, it allows us to have very candid conversations with the clients,
Hmm.
because if the client brings an idea that we know is not going to work, that their 5-year-old thought about last night at dinner, we
Hmm.
have to say to them,
Yeah.
guys, this is not a rabbit hole to go down. Our cash is on the line. And that carries a little more weight.
Hmm. Hmm. And that's an unusual way of billing, but thank you for sharing it. Jackson, my last question, and I can't possibly end without asking you about your book, The Tech PR Playbook. Tell me about your book. What are the hypotheses that you wrote when you wrote it?
The hypothesis was very simple. We saw tech CMOs, tech founders, tech CEOs holding common misperceptions about our channel.
Hmm.
And these common misperceptions led to them being disappointed with the channel.
Hmm.
So the point of the book was really to get at, here's this thing called PR. Here's what it is good for. Here is what it is not good for. And here are some thoughts on how to use it well.
Hmm.
That was really the point of departure. I want to say we wrote the book. It was published in March of 23. So your
Hmm.
listeners will know that's right around the time ChatGPT showed up.
Correct.
And
Correct.
I'll be honest with you, it was with printers and editors long before that happened. And obviously, we didn't have the context
Hmm.
on AI that we
Hmm.
do now. Do I
Hmm.
think that renders the book obsolete and useless? No, there's still good lessons in
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But calling it out because I think I have to, there's a glaring omission for AI. But as you know well, this is an opportunity for edition number two,
Absolutely
potentially.
right. Absolutely. But on that note, Jackson, and I'm hoping that we see, uh, you know, a sequel to the Tech PR Playbook with a big chapter on AI and ChatGPT. Thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we covered some very interesting and fascinating ground on PR. Your thoughts will be of tremendous value to my viewers and listeners. Thank you again, and good luck to you.
Grateful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.